Good morning and welcome to this very special Bath Life Business Surgery. It's with the University of Bath School of Management. It's our first with the University of Bath School of Management, and we're absolutely delighted to say we've got a series of 4, and I'll come on to those in a moment. So my name is Greg from Bath Life's publisher Media Clash, and thank you for joining. It's set to be a highly stimulating discussion around gender inequality, specifically in the context of the pandemic, the disproportionate impact it has had on working women. What is the she session? You may not be familiar with that term. I have to say, slightly sadly perhaps, I wasn't. And also, why does it matter? There'll be much to cover, and thank you for all of your questions so far. We'll be speaking with Dr Johanne Ward-Grosvold of the Bath School of Management, and it's the first of this series, as mentioned. Please send your questions and thoughts using the Q&A button below. You can ask anonymously, and we've had a number of questions already, some perhaps quite rightly being anonymous. Bit of a tease, you wait to hear some of these questions, or be named as you like. And note that today's business surgery is being recorded and will be on our Bath Life YouTube channel this afternoon. A few updates from us before we get going. Yeah, I mentioned we've got a series of 4. Look out for the next business surgery on June 24th, focusing on entrepreneurship. Then 6th September, miles away I know, on retail, and later in November on sustainability. Our next Bath Life Business Club is on Monday, June 7, and will be an event special, once more thanks to our sponsor, Moja Stewart. These Bath Life Business Surgeries are bespoke deep dive sessions showcasing companies and organisations' expertise, as today, through discussion. Please talk to us about how you might be involved. We can all do with advice and stimulation, fresh thinking. That's the idea behind this. And they'll be continuing as virtual in the future. And of course, our business clubs will be coming back in real life in the autumn. They'll also always be on our YouTube channel as well. They'll have that sort of enduring value subsequently. Bath Life Awards, the Bath Life Awards will be held on 9th September. And our 2021 finalists were announced just last Thursday at an absolutely wonderful virtual grand reveal event. There was such an outpouring of emotion on YouTube, on Twitter and on Instagram. Companies so proud to be involved with it. And it was frankly a joyous experience reading all those nominations. You can rewatch the action of that on our YouTube channel again. And please do join our waiting list to find out when tickets are available. We're obviously being very careful about the availability of tickets this year. We sell out each time, but it's particularly so this time around. There's a great roster of sponsors, and there's still an opportunity to be involved as a sponsor. We've got something like 17 sponsors already committed and various other ones under discussion. It's just lovely to be able to bring together, after this year of all years, all different sorts of companies, from the coolest of the indies to the largest of our city's companies after this year, as I say. Great celebration of business in Bath. Another one slightly later in the year, 22nd October, will be the Bath Property Awards at the Apex City of Bath Hotel. We have a virtual launch event taking place just this Wednesday, actually, May 26th at 10 a.m. to find out all the latest updates of the awards about what's happening. And please join on that via the website with details. And yes, sponsorship's also available, 9 in place currently, led by Moja Stewart, our headline sponsor, and several other categories under discussion. The other news for this week is that the Bath Boule is back, or will be back shortly. The grand news. Team tickets go on sale finally on Thursday at 2 p.m. They always sell out, and it really is such a lovely event in Queen Square. So please do consider being a Little Boule sponsor for the Boule taking place, as you can see, towards the end of July. Consider that Little Boule sponsorship. It's a grand idea in that, wait for it, it costs just £1,000. There you go. There's always rubbish puns and jokes about the Boules, but the whole idea of the Boule, of course, is to come together, of course, to build business relationships, but fundamentally is to generate money for our local charities. Thanks to all who've supported so far, led by Brew and Dolphin, our headliners. Support for local charities is never more vital. There's one more thing, and that's EntreConf. Entrepreneurs, as we've got the session coming up with the University of Bath shortly, and entrepreneurs are central to this city. New ways of looking at the world, new business models, new services, products, jobs, new opportunities for advisors, investors, financial companies, lawyers, academic institutions, marketing agencies, and so many more. And that's why we've launched EntreConf, the Entrepreneurs Conference. It's running on July 1st. The future is unwritten. It's pitched at startups and scale-ups. Some of those may be the bigger value breakout players in years to come. The aim is to give profound insight and valuable inspiration, catalyze partnership, connecting all parts of the value chain, and celebrating the very special contribution of entrepreneurs. Great support so far. It's quite clear that entrepreneurs generate excitement as well as opportunity, and that many will benefit from that. Site is now live. Have a look at entreconf.com. Thanks to our first roster of sponsors. I will give them a shout out. There's Bath Spa University, Bevan Britton, Burgess Salmon, Lombard Odier, Rocket Makers, Storm Consultancy, and yes, the University of Bath's School of Management. And the future is unwritten. Please join us if that sector of entrepreneurialism is of interest to you. Last up, the heart of all that we do, of course, is Bath Life, and thank you for your support. Look out for the next issue on June 4th, which will feature the full list of Bath Life Awards winners. And it's just terrific. We can all see it, you can almost feel it across the city. It is great to see the momentum building and confidence rising once more. Right, let's do this. Let's bring forward our speaker, Johanna Ward-Grosvold. Are you with us this morning through the powers of Zoom? Coming shortly. There we go. Good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
How are you? Well, I'm very well, and I would just like to, for the benefit of those watching, just give a quick bio for you. Associate Professor at the School of Management, Deputy Director of the school's Research Centre for Business, Organisations and Society, graduated with a PhD from Bath in 2009, took the faculty role in 2010, and prior to becoming an academic, we're going to begin on this, you had a corporate career working across the media, energy and financial services sectors. Main research areas are corporate governance, CSR, institutional theory, and a key area of expertise, which we've informed today's discussion, representation of women on corporate boards, and currently developing a research agenda around the asymmetric impact of COVID on women and their leadership ambitions. So, gosh, there's a lot to cover. Let's begin with you. Let's begin with your backstory. You had, you mentioned the other day what you called a quarter-life crisis. You were at Reuters. Can you just talk us through that process, please?
Yeah, so I was very fortunate when I graduated with my undergrad degree to join what was then Reuters PLC, now Reuters Thomson, on their graduate scheme. And it was a wonderful company to work for, very caring, lots of absolutely brilliant people. But I felt after a certain amount of time that I wasn't learning anything that wasn't company specific. And I sort of didn't really see myself spending the rest of my working life there. And I was on the tube to work one morning and I came across an article in a magazine. It was Fortune or Forbes or one of these, and it said, "Are you one of the living dead?" And it was an article suggesting that in excess of 1 million people go to work every day in Britain, effectively tidying up their email inbox. And I kind of thought, yes, that is me a bit. And so I started thinking, what else could I do with my life? And voila, here I am.
So there was a moment of epiphany, and far be it for me to put an egregious plug in here, but it was a magazine that caused it.
How yes, yeah.
The power of the printed word brackets, yeah. Bath Life. Let me give you what I fear may be a sort of GCSE type of level question. Business versus academia. Compare and contrast the fundamental differences that you've experienced and indeed the similarities.
So I think for me personally, it sounds really trite, but becoming an academic allowed me to bring my authentic self to work. And so, as I said, I had fantastic colleagues. I had really interesting job opportunities working in the private sector, but I was in my early to mid 20s, and I very much kind of felt like I was playing a role, and it wasn't kind of true to who I am or you know what really interested me. And so I think the sense that academia is very accepting and has a huge magnitude, manifold of individuals, and kind of everyone sort of brings their own unique strengths to the table. And I think one of the things that kind of struck me is I've never come, so when I was going for interviews in corporates, there's always the kind of, you know, how do you operate in a team, and does your values and your way of being align with the corporate culture and that sort of thing, and that's not really a thing in academia, and I think that kind of brings with it some of the opportunities for allowing people to be who they are, and that's what makes academia a great place to be. I think the one thing that most of my colleagues in the private sector were very jealous of when I left was that I would be afforded my very own office with a door that I could shut, whilst they were all stuck in open plan offices. So I think that was possible.
Sorry, can I just ask you to say what is this thing, office that you mentioned? don't recognise the terminology, I'm afraid, but
quite. And so, I mean, I think in terms of the similarities, I think, you know, it's interesting that things like what we call the kind of the water cooler talk, you know, is still very much a thing. So there's a lot of the sort of, what I'll say, the informal kind of chats, the conversations, the politics, you know, that they're just part and parcel, I think, of every organization life. And so, you know, they were, but they felt less scary, less threatening, and more fun, because I was able to be myself at work, and so consequently they just sort of became part and parcel of life. So yeah, I've never looked back, but I'm really interested and keen to work with businesses, and that's one of the reasons why it was such a great honor to be asked to come here today, right? Because academia is really only effective if it relates to, you know, in the business sphere, if it relates to the people who are actually going about doing business on a day-to-day basis.
Well, at the risk of having some sort of, you know, love-in on this point, I think from our point of view, it's really, really important also that that we connect with the two universities, the colleges, the schools of Bath, because precisely you have such an important role in shaping our thinking, and indeed, you know, future supply of employment and interesting stimuli and so on. I want to come on to the joys, or indeed otherwise, of the pandemic. In many respects, this pandemic has been a great pause, but it's also been the great accelerator. Which business trends do you think have been accelerated, perhaps beyond working from home?
Oh, that's a great question. I mean, I think for me personally, the thing that has astonished me is the speed with which local businesses have modified, changed, upscaled, you know, pivoted their activities. So I don't live in Bath anymore, unfortunately. I live in Salisbury, but I've seen from our independent local shops and service providers just the absolute phenomenal effort that has gone into home deliveries, to creating, you know, for restaurants and cafes, you know, finish at home meal kits, and really just a much greater sense of community engagement. And I think, you know, especially the hospitality sector has been absolutely amazing at getting outdoor spaces set up so that you can continue to enjoy going for a drink or a coffee, but doing that in a more sort of COVID secure way. And I hope that two things kind of maintain, and that is the energy of businesses to be able to respond, and for us as to consumers to recognize and acknowledge and appreciate what it has cost independent small businesses to do that, and to really support them as we go back, and to show our gratitude for what they've done. So I think that's probably some of the takeaways that I hope beyond working from home we can be grateful for.
Support the independents, venerate your city, realise what you have, because you very nearly lost it, I guess. These are important positive themes. But I want to come to perhaps a more, well, if not negative, an area of requiring greater analysis, which is close to your area. The pandemic has also prized open the fault lines between men and women in many respects. The still enduring inequalities have been extended.
Yep.
What are the reasons principally for that?
So they are, as you'd expected, kind of multifaceted. I think one of the things that struck me when I began, when newspapers and the BBC began to carry stories around it, was just there is this kind of vicious circle around the issue of the gender pay gap. So we know that, you know, women on average make less than men for the same job. And what became clear was that, you know, for a family who were faced with prolonged homeschooling, who perhaps had several children at different stages of education, economically, it was cheaper for them to have mum stop working and stay at home to manage that whole area compared to dad, because you lose more income. And so as long as that kind of gender pay gap persists, there is always going to be a financial incentive for the woman to drop out of the workforce to respond to these kinds of crises. So I think that was kind of one thing. And I think the other fault line that we've seen is around those who've been able to work from home and those who haven't. And I think the fact that our hospitality industry was hit so very, very hard, which is an industry that, because of its nature, employs a lot of women who are trying to fit income generation around school pickups and drop-offs and around nursery and where there's a lot of part-time employment. And that has been absolutely devastating.
And we had a comment from someone joining this seminar. By the way, a number of these comments are anonymous, but she I think, I'm afraid I don't know, I think it is a woman. She says she's interested in the intersectional aspects of this, that the poorer woman will have different challenges to the richer woman, as you've touched on. The Black woman will have different challenges to the one of Indian descent, to the white woman, and so on. Is that also part of your thinking? You've touched on the economic, but
yeah. So the project that we're sort of very, very early stages of working on look at the intersectionality of race and gender. And the person's absolutely right in that the women from ethnic minorities have very often had a kind of double whammy, because not only are they subjected to institutional issues of institutional racism, or they are also more likely to work in precarious employment situations. They are less likely to have full-time permanent jobs. And I think you and I, Greg, had a kind of a chat about this before the interview, right? And you quoted some fascinating statistics to me about kind of the relative proportion of individuals in different parts of the country who are able to work from home, right? And I think some of the research I read was around, for instance, ethnic minority women who often worked in the NHS or in roles of public transport, who were disproportionately more likely to, they were worried about taking COVID home to their families, but at the same time, they were also in jobs where there wasn't an opportunity to do that comfortably through a laptop in your house. And they were perhaps, more likely to be breadwinners, etc. So yeah, absolutely. I don't think there's anything we can shy away from that has been very starkly revealed by this pandemic.
And we'll come back to one aspect of that, which is the Bath bubble and how atypical Bath is in most respects from most other places. I wanted just to play back to you something. In the course of mentioning this conversation today and discussing with others, I heard the view, which I suspect you may well be familiar with, that we shouldn't dwell on the inequalities and the iniquities of the system, and that the best will thrive anyway. How do you respond to that?
I think it's becoming increasingly clear that I'm reminded of, and I'm really sorry I can't remember who said it, but it was one of the kind of thing on my LinkedIn, and it said, if hard work, perseverance, and utter dedication to your job was a surefire way to success and riches, then every woman in Africa would be rich. And so I think there are inescapable facts around the way in which society is structured that plays out differently for different kinds of people, right? And I think what this pandemic has revealed is that some of those structural factors has prolonged the pandemic in some instances, right? If we think of the disproportionate, even just the geographic difference, right, in number of deaths and number of cases and things like that. So I think it's probably a bit more complex than simply saying that the best will all survive. I think if I'm sure we can all think of people in our lives who perhaps didn't have the easiest of starts, or who kind of succeeded against the odds, and would we not want more of that? If you look at the business case for it, I mean, taking the loss of women from the workforce is kind of estimated to run into billions. So if you're running a business, women are, whether we like it or not, involved in the vast majority of purchasing decisions, even if they are purchasing decisions for men, right? My husband never buys a shirt without running it by me. And so I think kind of...
I can only imagine.
And so, having women be able to contribute to that in a way that's meaningful, that also becomes meaningful for society.
I hope we're going to be able to bring forward Bill Vasiliev at this point. Bill created, ran, developed, and fairly recently sold the business Novia. Novia, many things, financial management business, financial services business, sponsors of the Bath Rugby, and also sponsors of various things we do. Is Bill going to be able to join us now? Because otherwise...
Can you hear me?
Yes, Bill, good morning. How are you?
Good morning, yeah.
I think you have something approaching a contrarian point you want to make.
Yeah, quite a few, actually. One of the things the speaker said a few minutes ago was that the pay gap that exists because men and women get paid differently for the same jobs is just untrue. In fact, it's illegal. And a lot of the comments that are made about the pay gap are actually about men and women having more different jobs. So there's more men in senior positions. So I take issue with that. It's just not true. And certainly in our company, we employ 200 people. Everyone in the same role is in the same pay scales, irrespective of gender. So that's the first point.
Can we hold to that first point? So how do you respond to that? That whilst of course individual companies such as Bill's company Novia are very sound and sensible, the macro position perhaps doesn't reflect that.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've seen some cases in the media where people have been kind of subsequently found out to be paid differently to what they were expecting. So there was a case at the BBC where two presenters, I want to say it was the Today Show, and they were both, I think the upshot was that one was paid £133,000 and somebody else who had the same slot was paid in far in excess of that. So I absolutely take the point that it is illegal. I also take the point that there are a large number of companies out there who are playing by the book, who are doing really well across these schools. I guess my sense is the government wouldn't see it as necessary to introduce gender pay gap reporting if there wasn't an issue around it. And I think that is, that's a good initiative for the company to kind of have brought forward, although that has been suspended now to allow companies to focus on the issues of the crisis. So with regards to the sort of level of seniority, I think I absolutely know from my research that there are on average fewer women in senior leadership teams. And I think one of the things that I'm being increasingly kind of having conversations with businesses about is, why is that? Why is it that women find that they tend to kind of what we call it the leaky pipeline, that women kind of drop out? It's particularly a problem that's been recognized actually by companies in architecture, in financial services, in particular the accounting profession, and also increasingly in not so much here, I haven't had the conversation, but in other countries, in law, where we are pretty equally pegged in terms of the number of men and women who qualify as lawyers, accountants, etc. But there is come then the point at which they have children or they have care for elderly relatives and that sort of thing. Very often it becomes the woman who drops out. And so, what is it that we can do as businesses to kind of plug that leaky pipeline, to then encourage more women to also make it up to those senior leadership positions, and so be in a position to then have both the experience and the opportunity to bring what they have to the table and to help and to be in a position where they then demand the same level of pay. And it sounds like your guest here is doing a very good job of making that happen, which is wonderful.
Bill, do you have a response on that, or do you want to pick up to you? I think you've got a subsequent point about how management should be able to run the businesses without interference.
So to the first point, the example of the BBC, it's very highly selective. It's a very few people like that, and those public personas negotiate their own deals usually. So it's not indicative of pay scales. The second point is, the speaker there just said that men and women out at the start, why is there leakage? I think that's the word you used, was leakage. And I'll give you an example. In our business, we did offer 2 people senior management positions, two females, and they both declined them because one said, I don't want the hassle. The other one said, I've got a family, I don't want the hassle. So my point is, there is equal opportunity. It's not a question of business not giving opportunity. There may be some, but by and large, there is equal opportunity. There's certainly a very widespread in this country. It's a very equal society. Anyone can get there if they want to. And I think there should be less pressure on management to start bending the rules for reasons of what is commonly called positive discrimination. There is no such thing as positive discrimination. There's discrimination, and that's it. And I think management, I think I said to you, management should be allowed just to get on and run their companies without interference. When I set up the business, Novia, it is immensely stressful. I was a founder. It's very stressful, it's very high risk. And the last thing you want is someone coming in and saying to you, you should do this, do that. Basically, you're struggling for survival, and people saying you should have more women or different ethnic groups on the board isn't sensible at all.
Could we, if you don't mind, if we could reframe that perhaps away from the specific Novia experience, because we each have our own individual experiences, and onto the general point. And I guess that it's perhaps an example where individually, of course, that is not a factor, at least one would assume it's not, but that collectively, the data shows there is an issue, that it's maybe women are, in some cases, lack the self-confidence to do with a whole variety of different structural reasons or personal reasons to step up to those leadership positions. Can you take the slightly broader point, please?
I don't disagree with that. Okay. I agree with that it's not management or business that's causing the problem. Just as you said, very often it may be women that's causing the problem.
Well, I would resolve from that, because I didn't quite say that. I was slightly different context.
It may be the other side of the coin, that people aren't taking the opportunities that are there for whatever reason. Which of
course is a deeper issue, which relates to a whole load of.
Which I agree with. I think my example sort of agreed with that, so I don't disagree.
Johanna,
I'm not being anti-women, by the way. I'm just saying I strongly believe that management should be allowed to get on with running the business.
Okay, Bill, thank you. We've heard the point. Johanna, could you respond to the specifics, but also the underlying general point, please?
Yeah, so I think what I'm reminded of was how I got into this area of research in the first place. It was back in the early 2000s. I was back in Norway, and I was reading a story. It's an expose in Norway's equivalent of the Financial Times, and the headline was "The Boys' Trip to Saint-Tropez." And it had been revealed that every year, 12 of the biggest, most powerful CEOs in Norway went on a boys' trip to Saint-Tropez, and they handed out non-executive directorships between them. And that became one of the starting premises for Norway's decision to introduce quotas on women on the board, because structurally, by definition of there being a boys' trip, no women were invited. And so I think that is a pretty clear example of where women have been purposefully held outside. And the Norwegian government went ahead and set up what was called a women database. And anyone who had a set of requirements that the government stipulated that was needed for non-executive directorships could register their interest. They got over 5,000 women registered on that database. And on the basis of that, the Norwegian government took the view that it was not the case that there was insufficient talent. It was, in fact, structural impediments to allowing women to get to the boardroom. And the Norwegian Association of Business started a program called Female Futures, where they had the CEO of the 50 largest companies in Norway identify 2 women in their ranks who they wanted to put forward for the cause. And they were then given training in how to be a non-executive director, and they were given a mentor who was a non-executive director to contribute to support that improvement happening. So I think I have no doubt, and I take my hat off to anyone who has taken the risk to start their own business and to make a success of it. I have no doubt that that is a high stress environment. I have no doubt that that managers go into it with the best of intentions. I guess where we're coming to is, if women are being asked to take on senior leadership roles and their response is, I can't manage that with my family, is perhaps to say, well, if it's somebody who is really good and we want them, what can we do to make that doable? And I'll give you an example. When I worked at Reuters PLC, we had a situation where our chief human resource officer, so head of HR for the entire corporation, he was stepping down, and the internal candidate they wanted to take on the job was recovering from cancer, and she was working 60%, and they turned it into a job share. And so, there was very much acceptance that she was not prepared to do that full time. She made that clear, and she said, if you still want me, I'm happy to do it. And so I think there are also ways and opportunities perhaps of thinking a little bit differently about some of these issues. And I think if I had a quick look on the chat, and I think if you talk to some of the women who are on this chat, I think a lot of us can probably identify situations where we have kind of felt that we've been a bit unfairly treated, or some who have had experiences of genuine kind of discrimination. So this isn't so much about kind of coming in and telling anyone what to do, but it's about opening up the discussion and recognizing that, you can run an even better business. And much of the research suggests that, firms do better in terms of financial performance, in terms of strategic performance, and in terms of innovation, the more diverse their senior leadership and management teams are.
Bill, if I may, we are going to have to move on to other topics, but thank you for your questions, observations this morning.
Okay, thank you.
We've had a whole raft of questions, but thank you, Bill, for. I'll just make perhaps one last observation on this: that the more anyone cites specific cases, the easier it is for people to say, well, actually, no, that's a one-off. And then the more one cites general research, then say, yes, but that doesn't apply to us. And so you face a continuing struggle, I guess, to make the points that you're making, at least for that reason. I want to come on to a related point, which is this: that the long arc of social justice, we all have to believe, we want to believe, bends towards progressive values, say employment rights, maternity pay, and so on. But does or has the pandemic set that back? And if so, is any setback a blip or a harbinger?
So I think there's, again, it depends who you talk to. I think the general perception that's emerging is that it has been, I think it was the leader of the United Nations who said that this has put that, globally, this has put our women's agenda back by decades. And so I don't think, if we look at kind of the big picture, that there is any doubt that this has negatively impacted our equality and inclusivity agenda. But I also think that it has also opened up an absolutely unique opportunity for us to begin to tackle some of those issues, to think about it differently. And one of the absolute privileges of my job is to work with the next generation of business leaders. And I am absolutely in awe of my students, the people who are coming through now in their early 20s, mid-20s, their commitment and their absolute fervor for social justice is extraordinary. Yeah.
We'll come back to this in a moment. I just want to move to a perhaps more optimistic view and maybe an inappropriate view of some aspects of the pandemic. Try this. Pandemic has perforce led to greater trust and greater awareness of the primacy of output over input. An historic, ages back, factory culture of clocking in, or that passive-aggressive management by wandering around technique, which is really checking what you're doing, has had to be superseded by trusting people to know their jobs and responsibilities. Are we all Scandinavians or dot-commers now as a result?
I mean, personally, I think that's a really interesting issue. And I think it, I include myself in that. I think a lot of women who, no, actually not a lot of women, a lot of people who kind of professionally grew up, if you like, in kind of my generation, we entered the workforce in the late 90s, early 2000s, which certainly in my experience was very much a case of presenteeism, right? And admittedly, we didn't have the technology to work effectively from home in the way that we do now. But I think, if I think of myself, I really struggled when I started kind of managing people with this sort of notion that they could fully do their job from home. And I've known for some time that was to do with me and my perception rather than the degree to which they were delivering. And, I haven't seen my PhD student now for 18 months, yet he has delivered absolutely phenomenal work from home, with supervision online and that sort of thing. And I think the trust element has probably been tested, and I think has probably passed for the vast majority of people and the vast majority of companies. That being said, there are also companies that are beginning to talk about introducing, retina trackers on people's laptops at home and that sort of thing. And I do think there was also kind of a debate around one of the, I want to say it was the head of JP Morgan, who's insisting on people coming back into the office. He got a bit of a backlash of kind of saying, well, come on, there needs to be an element of people getting together and they want to be together. But isn't really what we're taking away from this, that actually you can achieve a lot by trusting your people to do the job that they want at home, where that is safe and where that is convenient. But that does also in itself have some connotation. It assumes you have a meaningful place to live where you've got Wi-Fi that enables you to do it, that isn't going to have 6 other people who are trying to be on the Wi-Fi at the same time. And so there's all these kind of layers to that draws in a different social dimension in terms of the suitability of your home to do that. And I think for some people who, I have a friend who works in mental health outreach and social services, and she finds it quite disturbing to have really hard conversations with people online in the same space where she's looking after her kids and all those kinds of things. But I would hope that improved trust and ability to see that people want to do a good job, that the majority of people are committed, I would hope is something that we can take away.
Some of the issues which you talked about and Bill prompted in the prior part of this are about the macro position. For example, the greater provision of childcare enabling greater flexibility of decision-making between couples, who does what if childcare is prevalent and economically accessible. We've got a specific point which is coming from Rebecca Houston, I think it is, of Talking Talent around this area. Do you believe there's still a place for female-only development programs within organisations to support improving gender diversity? And then into a couple other points, what's new post-COVID for how businesses should support women's progression? And into that territory again, should there be enforced gender balancing? Enforced is perhaps, I suspect you may be slightly overstating, but monitored gender balancing in appointments and shortlisting. Maybe it's enforced, maybe it is that.
So to the first question, so I think it's a really interesting one, because I think so I've been to a couple of women-only leadership kind of development programs and courses, and I have found them personally beneficial to a point in that it has opened up to me a way of understanding premises of leadership very differently, right? And it has kind of given me a language to talk about leadership on a personal level that I didn't have before. I think the problem comes is that if you only have women, so one of the challenges women face is that we don't have the right network. right? We don't know the right people. So if you only have women, none of whom know the right people, networking with each other, that isn't going to solve it, to my mind. So I think it's an annoying answer, but I think it's a bit of both. It's a bit of opening up opportunities for women to develop their skills and competencies in a way that is conducive to the way they learn, the way they think, but then to also have the opportunity to make the connections and the contacts that they need. And then the second question, which was that relating to childcare, did you say?
Sorry, it wasn't related to childcare. It's related to pretty much enforcing, or at the very least monitoring appointments on a gender basis. Yeah,
so I mean, I obviously don't know what industry you're in and that sort of thing, but I think what's interesting is one of the narratives that have come out when you talk about enforcing diversity is often that and often younger women will say that I don't want to be enforced, I don't want to be a quota, I want to get there on my own merit. And I spoke to a couple of senior non-executive directors when the Norwegian quota came in, and I said, how do you feel about it? You got there on your own merit and were there before anyone else. And they said, oh, we can't wait. It has taken such a long time to get any kind of movement of these numbers, and we want to go into a boardroom and see more women. And so I think it might be right for the business. I think how you frame it to the women so they don't feel like it's a pity role, I think is important. And to that, actually, it's a great question. I was thinking about some of this today. I think it's really important that as leaders in the organization, if you're able to model some of those behaviors yourself, because I think what can be really hard is to say to a woman, oh, do you know what? Why don't take that client over in America because of the time difference, and I know it's hard with childcare and stuff. Why don't you have the UK clients? Just kind of give yourself a bit more space. That woman is probably going to say that's a demotion. That's them not believing in me. Whereas actually what they might genuinely be trying to do is to allow her to manage her life better. But if you have somebody in the upper ranks who say, do you know what? I've got young kids. I'm not going to take those American clients because that clashes with school pickup. That's a really strong modeling of behavior that might then give women further down the organization the sense that actually accepting those opportunities for managing life is okay because it's also done by the seniors, and that it isn't then going to be held against them in terms of promotion.
We've also had a comment on there's been a whole load of different, I keep looking over here, a whole load of comments here, but one is in the territory of positive discrimination, that essentially it has to happen precisely because there is so much positive discrimination the other way. The person didn't talk about the patriarchy, but nonetheless there is centuries, decades certainly, of particular modes of working which have broadly limited, if not excluded, certain groups. I'm not saying minorities, because that's a great context, but presumably you agree with that point.
Yeah, I mean, I think if we go back, there's this sort of famous cantor who wrote about kind of men and women of the organization back in the mid-70s, and her observation was, and it's kind of factually right, business organizations in the way we think about them are structured today was built by men for men, right? And so they came about in the post-war era where the vast majority of men went out to work, women stayed at home, or when they married and had children they stayed at home. And I think the kind of parallel development with the welfare state subsequently has begun to redress some of that. But we also know that I know several mums of my kids' school, right, who would love to go back to work, but the hourly rate they can command here doesn't cover what it costs to put their children into nursery, right? And so then, as one of them said, it kind of becomes, you have to go begging to your husband to subsidize you going back to work, right? Which is crazy. And so
that sounds like the 1950s.
Yeah, well, exactly, right. And I mean, and these were issues that kind of happened before the pandemic as well. But one of them had gone out and got a job and had kind of made that arrangement, and then pandemic hit, and of course all bets were off again. And I think she now just kind of feels so deflated that she's not going to bother for a while. And so my basic premise is just this: we're missing out on good talent. We're missing out on good people. We're missing out on value creation. We're missing out on innovation, and we shouldn't let that happen. And I think it would benefit all if we were just able to kind of accept that not every hire is going to be perfect, but you know what? That's the case for men as well.
Undoubtedly, it is. I'm going to avoid commenting specifically on that, but I know that absolutely, of course, is the case. Let me come to you about an appointment. I was talking to someone who was recently promoted immediately on return from maternity leave. And she said, which is great, said that many women had reached out to congratulate her on the apparent boldness of this. And whilst that's clearly lovely and thoughtful and deserved, isn't it also indicative of the atypicality that this thing ought to be, this type of thing ought to be normal and not a rarity?
Yeah, it's really interesting, and I do kind of feel for organizations in some instances, because I think you know, if a promotion is merited, a promotion is merited, full stop. Whether that is male, female, whether that is, you know, whilst you're pregnant or when you come back, it's merited. And so I think that kind of I think you're absolutely right. It should be the norm. I think also there is a lot of implied assumptions about people, and so I you know, a couple of people I've spoken to sort of said, oh, you know, it was kind of assumed that once I had children, I didn't want to travel, so the clients that were based overseas were taken away from me, where they were like, I had a setup at home that would allow me to do that. And let's be clear, 3 nights in Paris with a full night's sleep would be lovely, thank you. And so I do kind of think that sometimes organizations are doing what they think are supportive activities, but they're doing it without an appropriate dialogue with the individual. And that, you know, that could be men as well. You know, if a male member of your staff has recently become a dad for the first time, make sure they leave the office at 5, because there's an exhausted mum at home potentially wanting the support. And actually, as a dad, would you not want to go home and kind of be there? And so I think increasingly this pandemic has absolutely shone a light on the precariousness of women, the precariousness of women from ethnic minority backgrounds. But I think it has also opened up the specter that dad has been home a lot more. And, you know, there is kind of a family situation that needs to be managed for the best of mum, or, you know, the carer, and for the for the children and for the other party, if there is one, in that family setting. But I absolutely agree with you that it shouldn't be an anomaly that you're promoted upon return from maternity. If the promotion is warranted, then go for it.
To that point about dads, I actually mentioned this in a column in Bath Life this week. About this, one lawyer said to me that in lockdown he had realised that he just had not seen his kids, been so sort of, you know, that gathering rush for success, and which goes with that time, pressure, effort, and so on. Simply hadn't seen his kids anywhere near as much. He said there is no way I'm going back to that. You know, this is anecdotal. You know, it matters, but it may be a little bit indicative as well.
I think it probably is, and I think it may also hopefully have given an appreciation more of a kind of what goes on to make the day run, right? Whether that is homeschooling, or if you're a key worker family, dropping the kids off at school and doing the laundry and the lunch and doing the work, and, you know, all of that kind of stuff. And so I think it's probably opened up avenues for conversations at home as well about those responsibilities and who takes them and when. And, you know, I do worry a bit sometimes when we talk about kind of the raw deal women get, and in many instances we do. But it isn't to say that dads don't feel like they don't want to be there anymore. They don't want to support, you know. I think increasingly dads want to be involved. They want to see their kids. If the pandemic has also given pause for thought for how companies can manage male employees with family responsibilities, or indeed increasingly elder parents or other care responsibilities, then that's a good thing.
So if, and that very small word is doing some heavy lifting there, if we are living in more meritocratic times, why are some executives and owners of businesses still cautious or even biased against women in senior roles? Surely they would just want the best, whoever they might be. And how can we as business owners, male or female, how can we guard against any form of unconscious bias in this area?
I think unconscious bias is hugely difficult to kind of ward against. I think the first step is to know what your unconscious biases are, right? And so there's been lots of debate about the relative role of kind of unconscious bias training and how effective it is, or kind of how not effective it is. I think there are, like what I'll call legacy patterns, right? And so I think if you kind of cut your teeth in business at a time when women tended to be the secretaries and the tea ladies, then you've effectively professionally grown up in an era that was very different. And as I indicated earlier, I grew up in an era where presenteeism was very much the order of the day, and I struggled to get away from that mindset. So I don't think you should kind of necessarily hold it against people that they have that mindset still, but I think challenging yourself to look at things a bit differently is say, do we really need to have somebody be in the office 8 till 5:30 to do that job? Or can we redesign that so that it works for somebody who's really good and we really want to keep, but practicalities dictate school's drop-off is at 9 and pick-up is at 3, right? And so I think the bias thing is really hard, and I don't have any kind of quick solutions to it. I think in the first instance, if you're prepared to be really honest with yourself, which can be painful and awkward in a whole range of ways, then I think you potentially have the opportunity to start a conversation, to start thinking, and to not shy away from seeking out people who are going to challenge you on kind of how you think and how you perceive things.
Yeah, to build a successful culture, you don't just simply want clones or people who do effectively as asked. You want people who will challenge.
Exactly.
And what I've seen in other businesses as well is that sense of the value of empathy. Does the world look like to a 20-something? Because it really does not look like something to, my venerable age and so on. I want to come back to the Bath bubble points. When we chatted earlier, you said that you were attracted by the socially liberal values of Bath. And it's clearly one of the most knowledge-intensive cities with a high proportion of degrees in the populace and pro rata the second most student-intensive UK city behind Durham. But isn't it also a bit of a bubble, or worse, an outlier?
My instinct is to say that it is very much a bubble, and it probably is an outlier in some respects. I wouldn't want, I haven't kind of lived in London for such a long time that I wouldn't be able to kind of draw any comparisons, but Bath has changed beyond all recognition in terms of the business life of Bath in the last 20 years, right? And so there's a much more sense of entrepreneurial spirit. There's just much more, if you graduated from Bath Uni in 2000, as I did, there was basically one company locally that took graduates, and that was Deloitte and Touche, who had a little office down by the train station, but there were no graduate opportunities in Bath, and so Bristol or London was kind of what was calling, and I think almost a bit like your own kind of Twitter feed, or you tend to follow people who are going to reinforce your own views. But I think the role Bath has to play is, where it can, it has the opportunity to be a real good role model for innovation, for entrepreneurship, for thinking differently, and for social inclusion in some very meaningful ways.
So in a sense, it doesn't matter so much that it's not like the rest of the UK or atypical, because it gives a unique opportunity, even responsibility, to be the thought petri dish, if that's not cutting across all different sort of disciplines as a metaphor for some parts of the country. Yeah,
look, I think there are some ways in which Bath is never going to be kind of the kind of vanguard of for instance, there are not that many ethnic minorities living in Bath, and so, but I do think that in other senses, it has a kind of peculiar mix of people, like you say, very well educated, a lot of people who moved down from London. There's an energy about Bath, and there is a kind of novelty of thinking, yet it's anchored in the absolute beauty of the history that the town has, and I think that's a very unique position to have. It kind of marries and enables modern entrepreneurship to thrive against the backdrop of something that's 200-300 years old.
That duality of ancient and modern is something which I'm sure fascinates everyone in Bath. We're all the beneficiaries of a blossoming of creativity of a small number of people, most likely men, I think, but as it happens, but a small number of people from 200, 250 years ago, for which we are all those beneficiaries now. I think there's a boomerang question in that, which is, okay, and what are we doing? What is going to be the legacy of this generation, of those in Bath in 2021, 20, 30, 50, let alone 200 years' time? I want to come back to that entrepreneur point, and that's, you've touched on, of course, one of the reasons why we've launched EntreConf, this new event for entrepreneurs, which University of Bath is one of our sponsors. We've had a question from our good old friend Anonymous. Is it part of the problem in the entrepreneurial sector that women are not getting funded mainly because it's men who are in charge of the funding? There's a recent UBS survey that showed that in Europe, only 2% of VC funding went to women. And that's the next generation of business, 2%.
Yeah. Yes.
Yes. I mean, these are structural issues, of course, but any observations about how that might be?
Yeah, so I mean, entrepreneurship per se is not my area, but my understanding from kind of anecdotal evidence and kind of industry reports is that, yes, that's absolutely a problem. And another thing I've heard as well is that women are women think differently about setting up businesses. And so they don't necessarily go to set up a tech company, but they'll set up a dog business, a dog walking business, and so they don't set up the businesses where there is scalability, where there is kind of sort of potential for sexy investment in kind of in the tech industry. But yeah, I have also heard that women are far less likely to attract meaningful funding. And I think that's, that would be a fascinating discussion to bring into your entrepreneurship surgery next time. I also was reminded of a quote, and again, I've forgotten who it was, who said, she knew the opportunities of life were limited. She knew she could do it. She just didn't have the energy at the end of the day. And it possibly was kind of resonated with me a couple of years ago in the midst of sort of young children and whatnot. But I think it goes back to that slightly vicious circle that we talked about at the beginning, right? That if the women are taking the majority of responsibilities at home throughout the pandemic, for homeschooling, for keeping the house, for doing the food shopping, potentially also going out working in kind of key worker roles, where is kind of the headspace going to come in the midst of the cognitive load to kind of dream up these business ideas? And I think there have been cases of women who have done it through the pandemic, and that has been absolutely astonishing. There's been some really good changes in business, but again, the ones that I've read about have been in things like beauty, fashion, the more kind of industries that we think of as traditionally more female dominated. And so I don't know whether that might be one of the reasons why they are also kind of struggling. Whereas I suspect also a lot of it's got to do with the other point I made about, having the right contacts, being in the right networks, having the opportunities to meet the right people, and being ballsy in putting yourself forward, right? Because that's the other way in which women tend to play the game slightly differently.
But it actually touched on the point I was going to suggest to you, which is about the whole concept of confidence. There's any amount of analysis, whether it's at school or university, of men typically, or boys at school, typically having a greater expectation of success than women. And it comes out on something and by the way, that's a fallacious belief, because that isn't the case. And then the other, it comes out, for example, on driving ability. Men rate their driving ability there on aggregate, and women rate theirs there. And there's no difference in capability between them. But that ability to be confident, both to dream up something and believe in some bigger play, but also to articulate it, which is what the pitching round is. That must be an inhibitor, and that's I fear that's, if not intractable, that's certainly very difficult to respond to.
Yeah, and it's interesting. So I teach a first-year undergrad unit, which is it's basically kind of the very first thing they learn when they come to university, and that's to present. It's their presentation skills, and it's a huge difference between between male and female students in that regard. The men are much more likely to kind of have a go. We kind of make it so that everyone has to, in the course of the year, everyone has to present, but when they get to choose in the first semester who kind of goes first, more often than not, it's the boys who go first and kind of want to have a go and want to try. And so I think we as an institution are trying really hard to kind of foster that ability and that professional skill. But I absolutely take your point that the way of kind of portraying yourself, the way of asking for things is very different. And I spoke to a woman who was voted one of the 40 most influential women on Wall Street. And she said, when it came to board work, she said, women, you have a lot of papers to read basically for each board meeting, stacks and stacks of it. And she said, women tend to want to learn things with their head and their heart, whereas men are prepared to just learn with their head. And so she said, I was told that, she said, read 80% of the board material. And if you're comfortable understanding the consequences of not knowing the last 20%, then don't bother. And she said, that's the approach men take all the time. But we as women sit up till 2 o'clock in the morning reading every last comma and every last semicolon. Well, but she said, after she changed her approach to do it that way, she said, I became a lot more efficient, and I became a lot more confident, because I knew what I didn't know, but I also knew that I knew more than enough to have a meaningful contribution to the discussion. And so I think that was a really interesting way of comparing approaches to doing it.
And in terms of perhaps more pejorative language, I could not comment about who this is, but it's one former Prime Minister of England, of the UK, commented on another former Prime Minister that she was a girly swat. And that was almost as bad as it gets. And in that revelatory comment, you had an insight into that person. I'm not going to name who that is, their particular perspective. I did just want to pick one other point about this entrepreneur thing, and we are through our hour, but I want to make this point if I may. If there are people watching this who know of, or indeed are, female entrepreneurs or female entrepreneurs in the making, please do talk to us about EntreConf. We want to use this as a showcase. It is a way of inspiring new generational thinking. It's not a plea for funding or anything like that. We have a platform, and let's make sure that we're using it sensibly and responsibly. I want to come to one last question to you, which is, it's a pretty bland one, but anyway, here we go. Are you on balance for all the travails of COVID and the pandemic and so on? Are you on balance more optimistic about the opportunities for women in business than previously, or not, and why?
So I am. And I think one of the reasons for it, as I said, is some of the conversations that are taking place in businesses now were conversations that were unheard of when I started. And I've, I see some of the initiatives of major organizations on LinkedIn around return to work rights for women after they've had children. And I don't mean, they're following the law, but additional support in enabling women to come back to work. As I mentioned earlier, our incredible students who they are so switched on about issues of inequality, of gender, the Black Lives Matter movement. And I teach a final year option, where I had over 100 students this academic year, and they write about all these social injustice issues, and it was just staggering the engagement. So yes, I am hopeful, but I don't think we can be complacent, and I think what has been very clearly shown, we have a long way to go. But I think we can absolutely take heart from how far we have come in some very meaningful ways, and that we should take the energy of the way in which we've moved forward and put that energy into the issues that have been revealed by the pandemic, and to ensure, going back to the first point raised about the intersectionality being addressed around race and gender.
Well, that was fascinating. We are through our hour. I've just got one other observation from one of the attendees. This person says, are there examples of companies or entrepreneurs in Bath who are leading on these issues? I would ask anyone who's got observations about that, join in on our Bath Life Twitter feed or the LinkedIn feed, because why not give a shout out to companies and individuals who are doing good or at least better work in this area. We've had a ton of comments, far more than we've had previously. This is a vital, important topic, and in an hour we've covered some ground, but there is so much more ground to cover. I would like to return to this at some stage, but we will come back to that if you're up for it as well, because
absolutely,
and truly stimulating. It's if art holds a mirror up to nature, this conversation has exactly done that. It's making me think differently about how I work with our people, our teams, and clients, colleagues, and so on. And I'd hope others have taken some of the inspirational and insightful comments from Johanna this morning. So thank you very much indeed. Thank you to all of you for your time and questions today, and more generally, thank you for your support for Bath Life as this weirdest of years ends, thankfully, and when that new world emerges. The future is indeed unwritten. From Bath Life, good luck to you all in the coming months. This has been a Media Clash production, and this has been our latest Bath Life Business Surgery. Thank you. Bath together, always. Thank you.